Hello, this is Katie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at making a ring design. So this is just a nice simple ring, but we've got a really nice weave around the outside of it. So a nice detailed weave. We've got it kind of offset in the middle at a slight angle and some little not swirls, like loops to finish off. The gemstone I've chosen to use, this is an Amazonite, and I've actually chosen to use a cube just because it sits really nicely against the skin. As you can see, it'll sit really nice and flat. But if you haven't got a cube gemstone, that's fine. You can still use your general round shapes, and you can still use your rondelles, which actually sit really quite nice inside this little setting as well. So let's just take a look at what wire we're going to use. So I'm going to be using some 0.9mm wire and some 0.315. So that's not one that I normally use in my tutorials, but it gives a slightly finer look, and as you can see, it creates a lot more detail. I will pop the wire gauge conversion down below for you to see as well. I'm also going to be using a ring mandrel today. So I prefer to use a steel ring mandrel, and one that is solid the whole way around, because sometimes you get them and they've got a groove, and I find that quite a hindrance, especially if you're hammering, because you can see I've done a lot of hammering on this, and in fact it's very hard to actually see the sizes on this now. Now I will be stating, if I do state a size, it'll be a UK size, but I will pop the conversion in below when I've checked that out for you. And the tools that I'm going to be using are just really basic wire work tools, your chain nose pliers, your round nose pliers, and your flush cutters. So we'll make a start and begin. So let's just move a few things out of the way. We have got some 0.9mm wire, so we've got 3 lengths of these, and they are around about 15 centimeters each. That's going to be plenty, 15 centimeters. I'll pop that in inches down below as well. And we also are going to need our 0.315 wire. So I would recommend just working from the reel, but if you have cut it, you need probably about 1.5 meters to 2 meters, but definitely work from the reel if you can do so. So what we're going to do is, because I want my wires to end and finish on a middle wire, we're actually going to pick up one of our wires, pop our anchor wraps on, and then pop wires either side of it, just so that we finish with our wire finishing on the middle wire on each end. Okay, so we're just going to wrap around a couple of anchor wraps, so tail underneath and 2 wraps, and that's just our anchor wraps. That is what we start nearly all of our wire work with. So just 2 wraps onto 1 wire, and that's a nice secure finish. And make sure every time you end a wire, you always end it on 1 wire with 2 wraps, and that'll give you a nice secure end as well. So I'm just going to pop my wires on. Just do make sure they're as smooth as possible. Always use, that's a nice tip, is that this part of your hand is the warmest part of your hand generally. If you use that, it'll smooth out really nicely. So just popping your wires together, just kind of get them together at the end. We need about 4 centimeters or so at the end, and this one on this side. So we've got all of our wires. Our wraps are in the middle wire here, and what we're going to do is we're going to wrap under that middle wire. We're going to wrap the top 2 wires, 1 and 2. Then we're going to come down to the bottom. No, we're not. We're going to come up in between those 2 we just wrapped and down to the bottom. And there we go. So we've got 2 wraps on 2 wires, top and bottom. So I'll just bring that further up. So we've got 2 wraps at the top, these top 2, and then 2 wraps at the bottom, these bottom 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our wire all the way up the back, all the way down the front, and you can see how I'm actually placing that wire. I'm not just kind of wrapping it around. I've pushed it up, pulled it across and down. We don't want to pull this so much that we end up with no gap in between the wires, because we want to be able to get in and out there. So it's just a matter of bringing it all the way around and placing it into position before we actually wrap it. So I've taken it all the way up the back and then brought it all the way down the front. So I've got 2 full wraps around all 3 wires. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, I know I need to come back up to the top and wrap those top two, so I'm going to come right up the back and over those top two. So 1 and 2. Then I'm going to come up in between the two I just wrapped, pushing everything together nice and neatly all the time, and then wrap the bottom two. And we're just going to keep repeating this little process. So wrapping the bottom two twice, and then once I can see I've got 2 wraps, I'll bring that up there. I've got 2 wraps on the top, 2 wraps at the bottom, and I'm going to do that whole circuit all the way around again, placing my wire as I go. So I've got 2 full wraps all the way around, 3 wires, and then I'm going to go back to the top again. So we'll just do this last set and then we'll show you what it should look like. So around 2 wires. You can see I've got my wire around them top 2 wires, so I'm going to come up in between, pushing up and back down to the bottom, and wrapping those bottom 2. Okay, and then it will start coming back up again. So this is what we should have at the moment, and what you need to do is work out how long you want your ring, so the actual length of the ring shank. Now I'll show you the weave in a second, but I'm just going to show you a quick little tip of how to find the actual length without having to kind of offer it up all the time. So we're just going to use a piece of scrap wire. So if you've got a little piece of scrap wire hanging around, just grab that. So I'm just going to take a piece of wire, we'll pretend that was scrap. You're going to find your ring size, which is very hard on my ring mandrel because I've hammered them away, but I'm going to go for this like kind of O here. So this is O UK size. And I'm just going to take the wire all the way around until it crosses, like so, and I'm going to hold that nice and steady there. Now if I cut this wire on that line, doesn't matter about it being flush cut or anything, it's just a scrap piece of wire. Now I've got the ring size that I want, but obviously it's still in a circle. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth this out. Now you may need to use your pliers a little bit because we want this to be the length, so we want it to be as smooth as possible. Smooth it back out, and that's going to give you your ring size. So I know that is now an O ring size, so I can build my weave up to being whatever size I want. So this one that I've pre-done, I've obviously made it a little bit bigger. We'll find out the exact size when I pop it back on the ring mandrel. So once you've got your weave done, it should look like this. So you're going to go to whatever size ring size you are requiring. We'll just continue this weave until you get the size that you want. Now this is the wire that we started with, remember, on that middle wire. So the tail we can snip off. Like so. So we've snipped that tail off, and now we're ready to pop it onto our ring mandrel. Now make sure you've got a good few inches left because this is going to be the wire that we use to attach the gemstone. Do not cut this off, otherwise you won't be able to attach your gemstone. So we're going to offer this up to the ring mandrel, and what we want is the wire to come in the middle. So I want the wire to be in the middle, this wire here, the actual weaving wire. So if we've measured this right, our weave should end sort of next to each other, like so. Okay, so next to each other. In fact, this is going to be a bit bigger. I must have got carried away when I was weaving this one. So we want these to be level with each other so we can add our gemstone. Okay, so we're just going to shape that to the size that we require and take our mandrel out for a few seconds. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring my wire through so it's coming over the wire in the middle, so over this wire closest to the middle, and I'm just going to pop a single wrap on there just to make sure it's nice and secure on there. So now I can pop my gemstone on, so I'm just going to I'll pick up this amethyst one. So I'm going to pop that on, let that drop down, and you'll see it fits really nicely in that gap. Okay, so what we now need to do is wrap onto this wire here, so this wire closest to it. So I'm going to take the wire through. We want this to be really nice and tight as we can get this sat in the middle, okay? And we're going to wrap over that wire. So we're going to wrap once and then through. You might just have to separate it out a little bit. Through again, so pushing that all together and then back up. And then what I want to do is, because I know I've got two really good wraps on there, what I want to do is, if I can, don't worry if you can't, if your drill hole's big enough, I'm not even sure, I didn't check this one, whether it is or not. So just smooth the end of your wire out. See if you can get your wire to go all the way back through. Now this one has gone back through. Now the problem that we do sometimes have when we try and take wire back through is it causes a little knot. So pull it through until it's almost there, and then just spend a little time just organising it so we don't end up with a knot. And then what you can do is you can put your round nose pliers kind of in there just while you tighten it up, not closing it around. It's a little bit fiddly, especially under a camera, but just kind of pulling that till it comes a little bit tighter around that loop. We're just kind of trying to deter it from creating a knot. So pulling that, taking the pliers down a little bit more and pulling until we've got the smallest loop possible. And then hopefully when we pull the last piece, yes, it's gone all the way through. Otherwise, if we just pull it straight away, we tend to end up with a knot of wire. And once your wire's knotted, it's fractured and you're not going to be able to get away from that. So now I know my gemstone is super secure in there because it's got two wraps, two lengths of wire through it. So now all I need to do is finish off my wire. So I'm going to finish off my wire here. So I'm going to wrap, like I said right at the beginning, two wraps on a single wire. Now when we're finishing off on a ring, we always finish our wire on the outside. That is because we can kind of smooth it down, we can squish it like we'd normally do, but because it's going to be sat against your finger, you really don't want it to be scratching or anything. So I'm going to finish my wire off again using the flush side of my pliers. So the flush side, the flat side of my pliers goes closest to my work, and I'm going to cut that as short as possible, as close as possible, and then I can give that a little squish and just give it a really good check to make sure there's nothing scratchy there. So now we can look at making these little swirls. Okay, so these little loops. So we're just going to separate these out a little bit. So separating them out a little bit each. Don't over exaggerate them, just to bring them apart a little bit. Now the ones on the outer are the ones that we're going to do first. Okay, so these are going to be around about 1 centimetre long, and then every time we go to the next one we're going to add a few millimetres. So these are going to be around about 1 centimetre long. We don't want them too big because we don't want them to be catching on things. And then again I'm going to turn that around and work in tandem, so when you do one side you do the other. So I think that needs to be a tiny bit shorter, like so. And then we're going to go in with our round nose pliers, so right on the very tip, so we can actually feel it on the other side, because I don't want to have to trim any more off. We can if we need to, but I want it to be right to the very tip of our pliers. So even if it's just moving a millimetre, and don't worry if it does that, that means you've got it in a good position if it clicks off, because you want to be right on that edge, and just winding that back towards the actual ring shank. And then we're going to turn it around, and again doing this in tandem, we're going to pop them right on the edge. Like I said, don't worry if it slips off there, that means you have got it right on the edge, and that's exactly where we need it to be. So we've got a little loop on each side, and then we're going to do the same. And remember, we did about 1 centimetre, so this time we're just going to go a little bit longer, just because we've got that extra little bit of distance. So, and then you could measure these if you want to, but I tend to just kind of eyeball things. So we've got our next set done, and there's my pliers, there we go, and we can just roll this back. So just rolling these back towards the opposite loop and as close to the tip as possible. That's our next little loop in, and again with this side, right on the very tip. and our next loop in. And then we're going to do the same with this one. So we went 1 centimetre on the first one, a little bit further, and then we're going to go a little bit further again. So we're going to go about there, and again snipping this off to around about the same length. Like I said, you can measure these if you want to. And we're going to take this one, so turning it back towards the other loops, right on the very tip, like so. We've got all our loops in there. Any of these that need adjusting slightly, you can do that right at the very end. It's nice to make sure they're all nice and even, like so. So there we go. That is our ring more or less finished. What I would do is just make sure that all these loops are as closed as they possibly can be. So just maneuver them if you need to, just using your chain nose pliers, make sure they're nice and closed. And then the other thing is we'll pop it back on the ring mandrel just to make sure that they are set against the skin. So what I tend to do is, because these can kind of, I don't know if you can see that there, they kind of like protrude a little bit. What I tend to do is I'll use something like the end of my pliers, and I'll just use that to just push that against, because it's a nice, it's kind of a bit like using a nylon jaw plier. You can just kind of round that around, and then it will sit a lot nicer rather than leaving anything protruding. So there we go. I'll leave that on there, and we'll pop the other one on so you can see the 2 rings that I've made today. So I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial, and thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and also don't forget to click that bell and make sure that you select all, and then you don't miss any of my tutorials. I will see you again very soon.